Welcome to the ICWSM 2020 Women in Social Computing panel. I'm Ini Mustafarai, a computer science professor at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. ICWSM is turning 15 this year, and we decided to celebrate this milestone with some of the people who helped shape the conference and make it the success that it is today. To introduce our guests, I asked for help from our ICWSM community members. Here is their welcoming video.
It's our pleasure to introduce Lada Adamik. I'm Eitan Adar.
And I'm Eitan Bakshi. It seems to be a rule that Lada has to work with at least one Eitan at a time, so we're here to cover most of the bases.
Lada's contribution to network science, social media, and what we now call computational social science can't be understated.
Through her work at Stanford, Xerox PARC, HP Labs, the University of Michigan, and Facebook, her research has shaped our understanding of online social media systems and the methods we use to study them.
Lada and her colleagues have fundamentally changed the way we view memes, information cascades, link prediction, social networks, and even the dynamics of the web itself. Before there was ICWSM, there was the Workshop on Weblogging Ecosystem, a workshop that we ran at the WWW conference. Lada helped lead the first of these.
Lada not only helped shape these workshops, but has filled every role at ICWSM, from co-author to reviewer, program committee member, conference co-chair, keynote speaker, and now the namesake of our new award.
We're delighted to see an award named after Lada and Natalie. Their contributions to the field and ICWSM have been immense, so congratulations to the both of them.
Hi, I'm Fabrizio Benevenuto.
I'm Juhi Kulshresht.
And I'm here to introduce Mi-Wong Cha to this panel. So Mi-Wong Cha, or Mia, is one of the most talented researchers from my generation. She's author of many widely cited papers, including an ICWSM Test of Time Award. And I had the chance to be her first student. She was a postdoc at Max Planck. So we became authors in many papers after that.
The first time I met her was at ICWSM 2012 in Dublin, which was also the first time I was attending the conference. Since then, we have worked on multiple projects together, and meetings with her are more fun than work. She has diverse research interests ranging from information propagation on web platforms, misinformation spread, rumor and fraud detection to long-tail content analysis. I feel very fortunate to have met her and to be able to count her as a guide, a mentor, a role model, and a friend. Mia, I'm sure you will inspire many generations of researchers to come.
I'm really excited to introduce Moonmoon Chowdhury. I'm Stevie Chancellor, and I know Moonmoon because she was my PhD advisor.
My name's Emre Kujiman, and I've had the pleasure of collaborating with Moonmoon for many years now.
Moonmoon is an associate professor at the School of Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. I met her in 2014 and remember that one of my draws to working with her was this paper she had written for ICWSM, predicting depression via social media data, where she pulled together machine learning and social media data in this way that nobody else had done before. Now, this paper is really influential at ICWSM now, and I think established her as one of the pioneers in mental health and social media research.
I've always been struck by what a great scientist she is and a wonderful collaborator. I really appreciate Moonmoon's passion for the societal impact of her work and the creative perspectives she brings to her research.
But one of the things I have always admired about Moonmoon is her commitment to her students as well as to the people around her. Welcome to the panel.
I'm Bernardo Huberman, and I'm privileged to introduce Natalie Glantz and Women in Social Computing panel. I have known Natalie for a long time. I was her PhD advisor in physics at Stanford, as a matter of fact. And after she took a course of mine in nonlinear dynamics, she decided to write her thesis on the topic of social dynamics and dilemmas. From the moment I met her, I was impressed with her clear intelligence, her curiosity about the world, and her uncanny ability to describe the most complex ideas in such an elegant and clear way. Natalie has had a distinguished career in industry, including the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, Google, and now She was also a co-founder of the startup Blog Pulse, and it was with that data that she collected through Blog Pulse that she and Lada co-wrote together a very influential paper. It's around those years that Natalie, Eitan, Matt, and Lada co-founded the ICWSM conference. I'm glad to see that the conference is turning 15 and that the younger generations are following in the steps of Natalie and Lada. I couldn't be more proud of them, and I'm always looking forward to the next great things they will do.
Hi, my name is Brooke Foucault-Wells.
And I'm Shubhayan Mukherjee.
And it's our pleasure to introduce Dr. Sandra Gonzalez-Bailon. Sandra is an associate professor at the Annenberg School for Communication and affiliated faculty at the Warren Center for Network and Data Sciences at the University of Pennsylvania.
Sandra's research lies at the intersection of network science, data mining, computational tools, and political communication. Her immense capacity to conduct groundbreaking research at the intersection of social science and data science is perhaps only rivaled by her amazing mentorship abilities that I'm proud to have experienced firsthand as one of her earliest graduate students. In fact, she's the reason I ended up in academia in the first place.
Sandra is also a tireless advocate for women in social computing. From direct mentorship to advocacy behind the scenes, I'm inspired by her commitment to ensuring equitable representation and participation in our field. Sandra, it's an honor and a pleasure to call you my friend, and our field is so lucky to have you.
Okay, we apologize. There was a problem with the video screening. We promised to share the link with you after the panel. I want to also thank you, all the people who participated in the video, and my student, Maita Navarro, for masterfully editing the Zoom recordings that we received. Lada, Natalie, Sandra, and Moon, thank you for being here today. Unfortunately, a few hours ago, we learned that Myung Cha had an unexpected emergency, which is preventing her from joining us today. We send good wishes her way and hope to have her with us at the next conference. Now, here is a little bit about the structure of this panel. We'll look at the past, present, and future of computational social science or social computing. Then we'll take a short break to announce the inaugural winner of the ICWSM Atomic Glance Distinguished Young Researcher Award. And finally, we'll answer questions from the audience. Please write your questions on Slack or the Gather chat. Our student volunteers will pass your questions to our panelists. So let's start with part one, which is looking back. We just learned from the video that both Natalie and Lada received their PhDs in physics, and actually were advised by Bernarda Huberman, who is very proud of both of you. So I'm going to start with a question for Natalie. Now, you were a physicist, so why did you decide to study social dynamics in groups of people? And in what ways did your computational methods of approaching this problem change over time?
That's a good question. Well, I came to Stanford to start a PhD in physics back in 1989. At that time, I don't know if it's still the case, graduate students did rotations in different research groups each trimester. And my last one was with Bernarda Huberman, who at the time was both in the physics department at Stanford and also at Xerox PARC. He had recently published his enormously influential book entitled The Ecology of Computation. I was immediately fascinated by the potential of using computational methods inspired by physics to study what we called at that time large-scale multi-agent systems. That's quite a mouthful. What started with the theoretical study and simulations of computational agents extended into modeling the dynamics of large-scale human behavior. And I should add that this all predated the web. In the midst of working on my PhD, the first web pages just started being published. And I remember coming into work every day at Xerox PARC, and the first thing I would do in the morning was check the What's New page. And this was the What's New page for the entire web. And pretty soon then, in Bernarda's group, we started studying patterns of human behavior through the lens of the World Wide Web. I continued with this work after I left PARC when I went to Xerox Research Center Europe And then when I went to IntelliSeek in Pittsburgh, and the data sets I was able to work with got richer and richer, from web data, mailing lists, message boards, and then web logs, Twitter, and so on. And from these, we could mine social networks, extract entities, infer sentiment, and compute their interactions and evolution over time.
I forgot to unmute myself, the classic Zoom error. Thank you, Natalie, for that short but very packed answer. So I'm going to turn to Lada, who also is a physicist. Lada, you are also interested in dynamics, but that of networks such as the World Wide Web and the internet. What were the questions that were interesting you at that time, and how did your physics background prepare you to tackle them? Bernardo told me a story about you being interested in atoms first.
That is true. Yes, I was trying to figure out where to go for grad school, and I met with Bernardo. I remember, so most of the tours were on the East Coast of the US, like MIT had like a huge snowstorm, and I was shown like dark labs with like, I don't know, condensed matter setups. And then there I was at Stanford on the roof of some building, and Bernardo hands me this Scientific American issue. On the cover was the paper that he and Natalie wrote on social dilemmas. And I remember thinking, this is so cool, but it's not physics. So it was like a pre-rotation. That summer, I worked in a condensed matter physics lab with a scanning electron microscope, just like in a basement that was just built for that microscope, no windows. And at the end of that summer, I called Bernardo up and I said, I think I want to study the dynamics of interesting systems. And from there on, I think there was an advantage to having a physics background in that I was pretty immediately drawn to networks. And sure, sociologists had studied networks very properly and mathematically and in depth. And then you had mathematicians who did graph theory and proved everything exactly. But physicists have not like a slapdash approach, but we'll just figure things out asymptotically. What is the rough behavior of the system? Can we derive some equations, and this will tell us what's really going on? And with networks, there are interesting things about their growth, their structure, power laws. I mean, physicists love power laws and scaling, so there's like a lot to do there, and it kept me busy through my PhD and thereafter.
Yes. So your paper on power laws is one that people recognize you for. Now, since Eitan reminded us of Bernardo reminded us of the LinkKDD paper on the blogosphere, right? The 2004 US blogosphere with the beautiful graph of polarization in blue and red. So I'm wondering now how the two of you went about writing that paper, and were you able to predict at that time that will become so influential and impact the field, right? Your paper is cited also in the Science article, the inaugural article about the inception of the computational social science.
Sure. So it was a long time ago, so Natalie can correct me if I'm misremembering. So first let me say, Bernardo had a half-year sabbatical in France. He was in Paris, and so Natalie and I didn't overlap doing our PhDs, but he suggested that I visit her in Grenoble at the Xerox Research Center Europe. And I remember that month, it was really fun hanging out with Natalie, but we didn't write any paper. And so I felt like a little bit of a failure then. But sometime later, I think 5 years later, so it's never too late to collaborate with someone you have a good sense about, like you really should be collaborating with them. I think okay, this could be wrong, but I remember there was a paper by Michael Gassner and Mark Newman showing cartograms of the 2004 election results. And I said, well, you know, I wonder if we can do something similar. And I think that's when I got in touch with Natalie about writing this paper. Another thing I did want to mention, Eitan Adar. So, okay, that figure, I had no idea that the paper would be such a hit. I remember sitting in my little cubicle at HP Labs and using Eitan's graph visualization software, Guess. And it would throw out the leaf notes, the degree 1 notes, like way far off. And I was like, gosh, this has to fit in the figure. I spent the better part of an hour, maybe more, dragging those things in so that it would look nicer. And I was like, oh my gosh, what kind of a scientist am I? Anyway, we got a lot of requests for that figure to be used. So I would say the moral of the story is, it always pays to beautify your visualizations.
Yeah, I've heard that is what people do now. They put their plots into Illustrator just to make them look better. Yeah. So, okay, Natalie, both of you mentioned Eitan, and in his interview, he mentioned these blog links, web blogs from the early 2000s, these workshops that Lada and you and Matt all together co-organized. So can you tell us a little bit both about those workshops, but how these workshops led to the birth of the ICWSM conference?
I'd be happy to. And like Lada, I had to dig back into memory and try to find data to corroborate my memory. It was a little difficult. It turns out that the first workshops were hosted on blogpost.com, which doesn't exist right now anymore. So it was hard to do all the fact finding I wanted to do. But we did start a workshop on weblogs in 2004, and this was at the WWW conference. And like you said, weblogs had recently come of age. Researchers had started studying them, but there wasn't yet a dedicated venue for sharing and publishing research. There were some papers being published at WWW. So we started a workshop with WWW. We called it the Workshop on the Weblogging Ecosystem. So you can see our roots there. And we ran it in conjunction with WWW for 3 years. So 2004, 5, and 6. And then in parallel, it turns out some other researchers, of course, had a similar idea. And they were running a AAAI Spring Symposium in 2006 called Computational Approaches to Analyzing Weblogs. So we met them there and we decided to join forces and actually start a conference. So that's how that happened. I still remember being on Stanford campus for that symposium and talking about this.
Oh, yeah, the famous AAAI Spring Symposium that always takes place in Stanford. Well, a shout out to AAAI, who then became the official sponsor of the conference. And it's... Let me tell you
a little bit more about the history, because there's a little bit more there. So we decided to aspirationally claim it to be an international conference. So that's where the international word came from. And in fact, it wasn't until 2011 that ICWSM actually made it out of the US. And then this is also funny. At first, we planned to call it the International Conference on Weblogs, because that's what we were studying, was weblogs. One of the conference's co-founders, Matthew Hurst, who was also my colleague at the time, he convinced us to tag on and social media. Keep in mind that terminology, social media, was quite new at the time, but thank goodness for his prescience. And as you all know, later weblogs was shortened to web. So we became International Conference on Web and Social Media, what it's known as today.
Yeah. Yesterday during our social hour, we played a quiz, and this was one of the questions of the quiz, like what was the original title of the conference? And I think a few people weren't able or they guessed wrong, one of either the current title or the previous title. Yeah, some people don't remember about blogs, and that's fine. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking us on a trip memory lane trip. I'm sure all our young participants in the conference appreciate this. I'll turn to Sandra now, who is our only social scientist in the panel by training. And however, though from the beginning of her career, she was interested in simulating networks computationally with focus on political participation. So then, Sandra, please let us know, how did the web and all this research that was happening around the web in those early years in 2000s affected you and kind of influenced your research and trajectory?
Yeah, it changed everything, right? It suddenly created all these new possibilities for research, not only in terms of data and methods, but also in terms of the object of study. When I started my PhD in sociology back in England a long time ago, doing research on the web, meaning with web data, but also on the question of how the web was being used for political purposes, it wasn't a thing, right? The web wasn't considered the real world, or at least not in sociology. All my friends were collecting data from dusty historical archives or in the field. And so to them, I was just browsing the web all day, right? Luckily for me, these pushed me to look beyond my discipline for ideas and training. And ultimately, it encouraged me to collaborate with colleagues in computer science departments, in physics departments, and you know, from the very beginning, it became very clear that if I wanted to evolve and develop my research interests, I had to overcome a parochial understanding of disciplinary boundaries. And I was lucky to be doing that at a time when communities like ICWSM were brewing and growing, and I could look at research like Lara and Natalie's and be totally inspired by it. And get a sense of the possibilities. And so in a way, this community gave me the inspiration that my field wasn't giving me. And eventually it allowed me to connect with other social scientists that felt like I did. And we are the people who are now, we go under the umbrella of computational social science, right? But I feel like I was lucky to be interested in a research topic that was becoming exciting beyond my discipline, but within reach.
Yeah, no, that's great. So a kind of a complaint that I hear sometimes from social scientists is that, oh, but we don't know how to collect data, and it's so hard and it's challenging for us. And I'm wondering, did you have to learn to do computational things?
I did have, but mostly because the courses that I was encouraged to take for my PhD weren't designed to meet the challenge of new data resources. And in a way, you know, that was good for me because that's what pushed me to engage, you know, with people in other fields. And I learned a lot by doing that, and it opened my mind in terms of the tool set that was available to me. You know, there's always a little bit of a steep curve at the beginning. The learning curve is hard at first, but I thought about this more as an opportunity than a challenge. And to me, what was most exciting, perhaps beyond learning the techniques or the methods, which, you know, everyone can learn those things, was to think about problems in a particular way, right? And sort of to think about research in a way that within sociology was a mainstream back in the day. So, you know, I never felt, you know, I felt it was exciting from the very beginning. But again, I was, I guess, at the right time in the right place.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, now we'll turn to Moon, who is actually the only computer scientist in this panel by training. So Moon, early in your career, you were also studying weblogs, or the blogosphere, so to say, and you were also interested in communication dynamics. This work gradually led to you looking at different aspects of communication, affective states, and then the prediction of mental health, like your famous ICWSM paper that Stevie mentioned in her introduction. Now, because mental health and all these things, right, are seen outside of what computer scientists do, can you walk us through this transition, like how you went from just studying the web or links to these challenging social science questions?
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So, I started my PhD. So again, a little bit of a trip down the memory lane. I started my PhD in 2005. And for the young participants of ICWSM, that meant at that point in time, the big thing were the blogs, the blogosphere. That's what, people who are interested in studying what happens on the web, that's what they were studying. So I started, like everybody else who are excited by these possibilities. Actually, Lada and Natalie's political blogosphere paper had a deep impact in what I was reading as a PhD student back in the day. And this was also, in many ways, the honeymoon period for this kind of research. Like we had the 2009 paper on computational social science. That introduced this as a new field where you can, learn so much about people's behaviors and social phenomena from these types of data. So I was very excited by those possibilities and all of the things that we could learn from web data, from social media data. And so a lot of the work that I was doing in the initial part of my PhD was a bit of like my fascination and intrigue with what is it that these platforms are offering to us in terms of our social interactions. And in some ways I was drawing on my own experiences as well on these platforms. I was pretty active. I mean, I've had a Twitter account since 2009. So it was kind of a lot of like reflecting back on how I saw some of these questions of interaction unfolding on these platforms. But over time, what really caught my attention was that, these platforms were not just, standalone technologies that existed and we were using, but in some ways they began to become, in some ways, a part of our lives. As a PhD student who was living like several thousands of miles away from my family in India, like I saw that these platforms had a real role to play in keeping people connected. And they were becoming a part of our lives. And in some ways, the lines between what we called, the virtual life or the online life and what we call the real world or the offline life, that was blurring. So this was sort of like early, towards the later part of my PhD. But that's also when an unfortunate life event happened. I lost my father all of a sudden within a period of 3 months to cancer. And that was in some ways a turning point in many ways, because it allowed me to look at life in a different way, but also allowed me to look at my own research in a different way as well. Like kind of thinking about that blurring of the boundaries between online and offline, and thinking about what is it that these platforms can offer to people in terms of self-expressions, discussing difficult experiences of life, things that are stigmatizing, that you don't feel comfortable talking about elsewhere in the offline world. What is it that these platforms are offering? So mental health was one of those examples, one of those cases where I kind of felt like it's a perfect example where we see that blurring of the boundaries between the online and the offline. And also what is happening on these platforms gives us then a peek about people's lives behind the screen. And that can have a lot of impact in kind of turning things around and making these platforms and what we can learn from this data essentially a mechanism for change in people's lives, and hopefully positive change.
Well, thank you for sharing that and for sharing that personal story. It looks like that's a perfect segue to our second part. We heard about your roots and how you started with this field, but now we can move to the present time and the near future. Now, we all have been going through this pandemic year, which has been challenging, and we mourn the losses of life across the world. But as Moon was saying, right, the internet and social networks were the things that kept us connecting during these very long months in lockdown. And I know how worried Moon was for her family in India. I follow her on Twitter, and I've seen her messages because of the dramatic situation in India recently. So that was that positive aspects, right, of having these social networks at these crucial time. But of course, we know also that every day we have been experiencing is this exacerbation of other societal problems, right? We have rise of authoritarianisms around the world, like India, our country, Brazil, etc. Then we have disinformation, racial injustice, decline in mental health, social unrest, inequity. I mean, this list is long, right? But what we hear often in the media is this sense that, well, it's the social network, it's the internet that somehow have played a significant role in all these changes, right? Now, all of you have been studying these social dynamics now on the web computationally for a long time. So please share with us a current project of yours that either kind of you have already started or will be starting soon, so that, let's see, can they help us understand what's happening at the moment, right? Can your research help us what's happening at the moment? Or on the other hand, maybe your research can help us transform some of these technologies that we use so that instead of promoting, hate and disinformation, they can promote healthy conversation, and we can embrace diversity instead of polarization. We want accurate information, but also things like solidarity and compassion, democratic engagement. These are all things that I know you have been working on. So basically, we'll start with Natalie, Lada, Sandra, and Moon. Please share with us something that you are working right now.
That's a great topic. lots of room for discussion here. So not all of you know, but I haven't been active in this community for a little while now. And I'm not actively doing research. I do like to think that some of the work I'm doing at Duolingo is still relevant, even if it's not directly research related. For those of you who don't know, Duolingo is a language learning app where you can go and learn pretty much, lots of different languages. We have 100 different courses. And the internet has enabled things like Duolingo to happen, where we have online education. We can teach millions of users at the same time. We can do A/B tests to experiment with different ways to teach and improve how we teach over time, make teaching much more efficacious. So we run something like 200 A/B tests on Duolingo in parallel at any given time to improve education. We have 40 million users actively learning each other's languages every month. And so this is something I'm very proud of. I'm a firm believer that learning languages helps break down barriers in real life on the internet and helps us understand each other better. Half of our users are actually learning English in order to improve their opportunities for better education, better jobs. And then the other half are learning all sorts of other languages. Some people, for example, learn the language of their grandparents in order to finally be able to talk to each other. And we also are able to include courses for endangered languages like Navajo, Hawaiian, Gaelic, and Yiddish. And then just coming back to social media, our learners get together to encourage each other and practice conversation and teach each other on forums like Duolingo's forums, other social media platforms like Reddit, WhatsApp, WeChat, and Facebook. So in that sense, it kind of comes full circle.
Indeed. I'm a big fan of Duolingo. So my son is using it right now. So every night I have to remind him to not lose his streak. He cares about the streak. But I mean, since you are talking about languages and grandparents, right? Like I'm from Albania, and there is not yet Albanian in Duolingo. Please, my parents want my son to speak Albanian with them, and he hasn't learned yet. So hopefully soon.
I will get added to the list.
I plugged that. Thank you, Natalie. Lada?
Okay, it's hard to pick one thing because my team, being the computational social science team at Facebook, actually works all of the above. So there's some meta challenges. You know, we have a good team, and but there is a lot to figure out. So part of the challenge is how can we collaborate with the academic community effectively, either by sharing data in a privacy preserving way or doing joint studies, because there's so many questions to answer and so many challenges. And I can tell you that we're reading external research all the time, and it really informs the kind of product improvements that we make. So in the slew of things, there are people who are studying disinformation, misinformation, coordinated inauthentic behavior. There's all sorts of really interesting network science there. There are people studying well-being, different questions. Does social media cause loneliness, or are people who are lonely turning to social media? How does social comparison play out, both negative social comparison, but also positive social comparison, where people are inspired to take on new challenges? We also work on a lot of data for good projects. So can we share business activity trends during COVID, COVID symptoms survey? What happens during a natural disaster? Can we share with partners movements, like aggregate privacy preserving movements, such that relief organizations can act on the ground? But just coming back to the main I think a challenge, in addition to the research that we can do, is just getting tighter links and more data to the academic community, just because this field is really happening right now. And part of the part of the reason why it is happening, well, okay, like there are a lot of problems and issues that we really need to understand right now, but also there's a lot that we can learn from data. So sharing data is important too.
Thank you, Lara. Maybe later, if we have time, we can come back to that. I mean, a lot of researchers want access to the data that social networks have. Sandra, politics and political communication is at the center of many of the things that are happening right now. So please tell us about some of your projects.
Yeah, so one of the students that I'm working with right now, and her name is Isabel Langrock, she's very interested in digital inequalities and gender gaps, especially in the context of collaborative platforms. And what I think is so great about her approach, and I'm learning a ton working with her, is that she's not only interested in documenting the asymmetries that exist online, and there are many, but she's also interested in evaluating activist interventions that are designed to overcome the asymmetries, right? And this shifts the focus from this passive, detached approach to research to a more engaged one. And she's not only interested in finding answers to research questions that are interesting for the community, but she's also interested in identifying effective political avenues for intervention. And I like that, right? I think that this approach is becoming increasingly common among the students that I interact with. And I think this is key to addressing many of the key issues and challenges that have been mentioned. I think at this point, no one would deny that under the shining veneer of technologies, there are always political and social tensions. And you cannot work on designing those technologies without paying attention to the tensions, which are social and not technological. And so I think that this connection between research and activism wasn't so clear in the past, or at least not in this community. I think it's becoming more robust over time, and I'm particularly very excited about this energy that I'm seeing among the up-and-coming researchers, many presenting outstanding research in this conference. And I think our job moving forward, I take it as my job, is to support this kind of work and try to give it as much visibility as possible, because I think it fulfills what motivates us all, right? So one is, the research, right? We're all interested in posing the right questions, the interesting questions, but also in changing things, and changing requires politics always, and shifting norms. And so I think that's what I'm most excited about, and it all comes from the students.
So we come back to what Brooke and Shaban shared about you, your abilities to mentor young researchers. So thank you for sharing that story. Moon, what about you?
So I'll talk about a couple different ideas. The COVID-19 pandemic was eye-opening to a lot of us. And I was not an exception personally in life as well as in my research. And to me, what really stood out is really it brought to the fore, the various structural inequities that exist in our society, whether in the US or elsewhere in the world. And what connected with me a lot is that, mental health is one topic which already suffers from many significant structural inequities. And these became way more pronounced in, the last year and a half. So I think one of the questions that I've been thinking about a lot has been, how can we better understand these inequities by looking at digital data, by looking at social media and what is happening on the web. And importantly, as we think about sort of interventions or thinking about these platforms that can support people in their mental health struggles and support people in connecting with each other, I'm also kind of thinking about, all of the bad stuff, like, what are we missing? I mean, what are the structural inequities that maybe we are inadvertently actually exacerbating, or maybe somehow by looking at these platforms, who are we inadvertently discriminating against, and what kind of challenges is it imposing to more disadvantaged parts of the population? And the second thing that I've been thinking about also, again, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact it has had on our understanding of the world is, the mental health experience is not a solitary, isolated experience. We need to kind of have sort of like an ecological view. And what could be a better example than the last year and a half, where we found that, mental health has been exacerbated because of the pandemic, because of having to quarantine, various kinds of economic hardships, racial injustice, and most recently vaccine inequity around the world. So I'm kind of very interested in those questions as well, like how can we better understand and take an ecological approach to mental health and bring some of those conversations to the fore, because they are already happening on these social media platforms. And we have an opportunity now to better understand those conversations and develop a richer understanding of mental health challenges around the world.
Thank you, Moon. And I've noticed already that many of the young generation has been following sort of in this path that you started with the use of social media for mental health, but also other health issues. This is actually a very good time to have our break in order to announce the award. Briefly, let me say something before that. Because it was the 15th anniversary of the conference, we were thinking about various ways to celebrate it. One was this panel, but then we thought about establishing a new award for young researchers named after Lada and Natalie, to both honor their achievements, but also their impact on our community. Now, the award is open to young researchers of any gender, race, ethnicity, and location. And we will give more details about the nomination and selection process during our town hall meeting tomorrow in Gather. For the moment, we will pass the floor to Lada and Natalie to introduce our winner. Other panelists, we're going to turn the videos off for that moment.
The ICWSM Academic Glance Distinguished Young Researcher Award recognizes annually a person who has distinguished themselves through creativity and rigor in identifying and addressing important computational social science research topics of societal impact.
We're pleased to present the 2021 ICWSM Academic Glance Award to Dr. Tanushree Mitra. Welcome, Tanu. I'm kind of hoping you're going to pop up. There you are. Hello. Tanu is Hi. Tanu is being recognized for pioneering work in online misinformation, identifying and auditing information credibility and its implications in our algorithmically driven online platforms. Congratulations, Tanu.
Thank you so much. This is just beyond belief that, I'm sitting in the same virtual room as all these amazing scholars. And I just want to say, like Lara and Natalie, your 2005 political blogosphere paper was in many ways one of the first papers which inspired me to start working in the space of social computing and computational social science. And one other quick story, if I have the time to share, ICWSM was also the first academic conference and which I attended, and it started my academic career. It was where I published my first paper, and almost a decade ago in 2012, when it was happening in Dublin. I think the best part of that, attending that conference, was my poster for my spotlight paper was very close to where Lada's poster paper was being presented. So as a first year student, I got all the courage that I could gather and then walked up to Lada and introduced myself and had a little bit of chat. So thank you. Thanks a lot. This means a lot.
Oh, wow. Well, congrats. And, if I'd known, all that you would do in the subsequent years, I probably would have been like, okay, take more notes.
Thanks. Congratulations, Tanu.
Thank you.
Well, we can bring all our panelists to congratulate Tanu. Congratulations, Tanu.
Congratulations, yeah.
Congrats, Tanu.
Thank you, everyone.
It's a delight to have you as our first winner of this award. And you also are going to be now as inspiration to all the first year attendees. And I hope they heard your story about approaching LADA and will feel empowered to go and approach you and other more experienced researcher. I think like the 2012 conference in Dublin seemed to have been very influential for young researchers, because I think Duhi in her video for Mia also mentioned that was her first conference meeting Mia there. So that's wonderful. And I know that Lada, were you the keynote speaker as well in that year? I think my history of, yes, because you were twice a keynote speaker, an honor that no other has had so far. Thank you, Tanu, for being with us. If you want, you can continue to stay here. Now we're going to turn to the questions from our audience. We already have one question here, which I think it's kind of interesting. It says, well, thank you, the panelists, for the great discussion. If you are comfortable sharing, what are some of the big mistakes you have made throughout your career? And what did you learn from that? And or how would you act differently if you had a do-over? Who wants to take that question? Or you can all take that in turn. Natalie, do you want to start?
Let's see. There are so many things that one could pick out. I think starting from being around in the early days of the web, I made the mistake many times of thinking, oh, I have this idea for something that could be interesting, and not pushing through on it enough. Because I found that there are things that I thought were good ideas that other people pushed through on and had enormous success in. So I think just believing my own ideas and realizing that actually following up on them is the key bit.
Sandra, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I feel like my entire career is an accumulation of mistakes, right? Like in hindsight, it's like, oh, maybe I could have done that differently, but then I wouldn't be where I am. And so, I think when you have a career in academia and research, it's the mistakes that matter, I guess, right? Like you're constantly trying things that don't work out, and then you try a different thing. There's, And so, I guess I could make up a story of, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that then, but then I would be a different person. So the point being, allow yourself to make many mistakes, because the whole point is to learn from those mistakes and try to do things better. But I think I'm also not lying if I say that, that there will be more mistakes than non-mistakes. And I think that's part of the deal of having a career in research and in academia. So embrace it.
Thank you, Sandra. Mumun?
I would echo what we have heard so far. So plenty of mistakes all through the career. But again, looking back, I think there was always something to learn from that. And I think that's the biggest strength of mistakes. One thing that stood out to me is I wish somebody told me early on that it's okay to not fit in terms of research. And that is such a valuable piece of advice that I would have loved to gotten early on in the career, that you don't have to necessarily look or sound like a computer scientist, because that's been my training. And what could be a better community or a better platform other than ICWSM, where we celebrate intersections between areas. I wish there were more communities like ICWSM, and I wish people told me that it's okay to be the researcher that you are. But I say that now to all my students and people I work with, that follow your passion. That is the most important thing. So that is sort of my biggest takeaway in the last 15 years of doing research.
Thank you, Moon. So before I go on with some of the question here, I'm wondering about the role of mentorship in both in the receiving side, and in the giving side. So you both have had that chance during your career. And what are some of your thoughts about how can young researchers, for example, go about finding supportive mentors that will, help them advance? And what were your experiences with mentors or being a mentor yourself?
Well, should I, Natalie, you want to go first just to keep on the tradition? Or? Yeah, I feel like I was so lucky with the mentors I got that I'm just trying to pay it back, right? My PhD advisor, even though I proposed doing a dissertation that had nothing to do with his expertise in a way, or it was a bit remote, and it pushed him outside his comfort zone, he was very supportive. He just, helped me do what I wanted to do and develop my own vision of what their interesting research was. And then when I started my first postdoc, I was also very lucky to benefit from the mentorship of colleagues who allowed me, again, to pursue my passion, to echo what Mumun said before. Without this mindset of you have to tick these boxes to get a permanent job. I mean, it was just like, do what you find interesting that's good enough for us. And again, like in hindsight, it worked, but of course there's a bias here. I made it, right? I could have very well, in a parallel universe, maybe I wouldn't have been so lucky. So I don't want to underestimate the importance of luck as well. But, in my own mentorship, I just try to do the same thing with the students that I work with, support them and as best as I can in allowing them to develop their own ideas and pursue their own passions, and and having fun with the research, because that's the only thing you really have control on, right?
Well, maybe I will turn it over to Moon, because Sandra and Moon are academicians, so they get to mentor lots of students. But then I'll go back to Natalie and Lada, because even in these technological or research settings that they have worked, they also have mentored and young people or continue to do so. And maybe you can talk a little bit about then what would be different between industry and academia. But first, Moon, and then to Lada, Natalie.
So, I just like what Sandra said, I have been very lucky to have been mentored by wonderful, supportive people. In fact, just to give you an example, I mentioned about losing my father. Suddenly, in the last year of my PhD, I had the kindest PhD advisor. For an entire semester, I didn't get any research done because that was such a challenge to even like get by every single day. And in my mentorship, I kind of try to pay it back in small or big ways that are possible. And one advice that I would probably have for young researchers is, of course, to look for mentors who are academically accomplished, they're well published, they're renowned, and all of that is really important for practical things like learning to do good research, getting a good job, and so on. So look out for all of the things that you're already looking out for. But add to that list maybe one other thing, which is look for a mentor who's also a good human being. Because you're going to spend, if you're a PhD student, you're going to spend 5-ish years. Probably you're going to spend as much time as you might with a partner or another family member. You're going to spend that much time with your advisor. So it's important to pick someone who's a nice human being beside being a good researcher.
Thank you, Moon. Lada, because you missed the previous round, do you want to go first?
Yes, the biggest mistake I've made was not charging the Wi-Fi hotspot. Yes, I actually find it, so we have lots of young people. We have interns come all the time and during the summer and sometimes during the year, and it's great. We really like having young minds around. So there is a lot of opportunity to mentor. I've always had difficulty mentoring like on career advice topics and things like that. And the way that I've been able to connect with both mentees, I suppose, and with my own mentors is through research. Somehow, I feel like, what Sandra's been saying about interesting questions and so on. It's like if you can lose yourself in those things with someone, it's like actually a great learning opportunity. And then if it starts to become a project or a paper, then you're learning along the way by observing what the person's doing. But everyone's different. And there are, of course, like more formal mentoring arrangements where you can find a mentor to talk about things more generally.
Natalie?
So again, I'm coming at this from a different lens. I'm in industry and also much more engineering than research. I head up engineering at Duolingo. And so a lot of, I do some direct mentoring, but I'm also making sure that we have a good culture of mentoring throughout engineering. Like what Lada said at Facebook, we have a lot of people coming straight out of university, also a lot of interns. So we try to provide them with very strong mentorship opportunities. And in turn, then when they graduate from that, well, they never graduate, they tend to have longstanding relationship with their mentors, but then this is a first opportunity for them in terms of leadership and mentoring to then go ahead and turn around and mentor themselves, the next generation, and even people who are still in university. And then there's the level of mentoring, career-wise, is the building leaders within the engineering organization. So mentoring people who are becoming tech leads or team leads or managers themselves. So there's many layers of how to help people develop through mentoring. And then on the research side, I suppose there's different kinds of advice and coaching that we can give to people who are strictly doing software engineering versus doing research in an industry setting, which, as Lada knows and many of you probably know, is more challenging to figure out how to fit in research goals and longer term research agendas into the very quarter by quarter metrics driven, deliverable driven pace of industry.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue to our next question from the audience, because it tries to draw these distinctions between, industry and academia. So basically the question says, how computational social science or social computing research skills apply to industry or product-oriented working environments? I think this probably might be coming from somebody who is doing research as a PhD student, but then thinks, well, will these skills be helpful to me? Or which of these skills will be helpful to me if I go to industry? So Maybe Lada and Natalie, I think both you could take this question.
Yes. So I think both if you have a background in sociology or related fields, this can greatly inform, like even if what you're doing is training a machine learning model, you can still benefit immensely from having intuition about what features, which are derived from the way that people interact or other behaviors, might be useful for whatever classifiers, whatever the classifier is trying to do. The other is to have familiarity just with computational, like, or data tools, heavy duty stats, especially if you want to get to the bottom of things and you're getting into causal inference, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are quite useful, but I think I wouldn't worry. Well, okay, it's good to get a range or portfolio of skills, but the nice thing is, like, if I look at my own team, like, there are a couple of physicists, there are also computer scientists, we have political scientists, sociologists, economists, operations researchers. We have people from bioinformatics, biostatistics, like some of those skills translate. So I would say, again, like, follow your nose, do what you think is interesting, get some depth of skill. And I think once you kind of get plunked into an industry research lab, your skills will be put to good use.
Thank you, Lada. Natalie?
This is another good question. Well, Duolingo is not primarily a social platform, as you all know. We do have some social features. We do have a forum. So there are some, we run into some of the same issues that any social platform does, such as having to deal with spam, having to deal with trolls and other kinds of bad behavior. So, you know, we're not yet at the point of
bad behavior is something that our community loves to study. So
this happens writ large or writ small in pretty much any company that has a social component. And then there's we're not yet at the point of hiring a social scientist, but I could see that we might be at some point in the future of how to actually build the community, how to build a community, in this case, of language learners, and the additional challenge there of keeping that conversation going in a second language is even harder than it is in the first language.
Okay, we are officially over our time, but I think I will just ask one more sentence from each of you. So ICWSM just turned 15. Is there some wish that you want to give to the community before we end these live streaming? Who wants to go first? Or
I
what
could
do you
go first.
want? Yes, Lada, go ahead.
We get to wish for anything? Okay, I would love more research on how to develop healthy online communities. Sure, there's a lot of focus on the negative, but it seems like, yes, there's heterogeneity in people. So some people are more disposed to certain kinds of behavior, etc. But also there are all these opportunities where people can come together and build community, get to know their neighbors, like share their skills, I don't know, learn language together. And how can we foster that kind of interaction? How can it be life plus better life through the online connection that we have?
Who wants to go next? Thank you, Lada, for that.
I love what you said, Lada.
I can go next. So, you know, I would say the last 15 years have been phenomenal for this community. I mean, this community has been at the forefront, you know, publishing cutting edge research and on like all of the outstanding challenges and questions that, you know, concern the web more broadly and social media in particular. And I would love to see the next 15 years for ICWSM to continue to play that role. What I also love about this community, I think what has really helped this community stand out in the last 15 years is the way it makes connections between fields, bringing in computational approaches, bringing in very large scale data and address questions that concern the society more broadly speaking. I think we are going to continue to have that mindset in the next 15 too, because these questions are only increasing over time. And again, a tremendous opportunity for this community to push that envelope at these intersections.
Thank you, Moon. And Sandra, you get the last word.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, I mean, more research on social justice probably, but also I can't wait to see the panel of women in social computing in 15 years' time from the audience. I can't wait to see that.
Okay, well, that's a great note to end. Thank you so much to all of you for being here with us today, sharing your stories and hopes for the future of our community. It's been, I cannot describe how happy I am to have all of you here. Thank you so much. And maybe in 15 years, we should do this again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.